G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for this late celebratory beverage over my usual cappuccino. I will admit it does feel a little gratuitous, but I just couldn't help bring myself to start this little routine with anything else tonight. As I'm sure everybody tuned in is aware, we're all here to celebrate West Coast's breaking through their first win of what's been a very difficult start to the 2025 season. And before we get going, I do have to acknowledge that Make Cake Not War commented that he was tipping the Eagles this weekend. And at the time, I replied that if we win, I'll have to give him credit. So there you are, Make Cake Not War, you called it. Funnily enough, I'm pretty sure he's a Richmond supporter, by the way. So I hope nobody minds the program for tonight's video being a little more drawn out than usual as I try my best to savour the win. To be honest, I was actually putting together my list of best players from the win, and I was actually starting to think it was sounding like an Oscars acceptance speech, just because of the weight of numbers of good performers that started to, build themselves into the list. But anyway, what we'll be covering in the program tonight, we'll start with, first and foremost, a few musing thoughts I had from the win that probably weren't key takeaways and something I just feel like putting in there. Then best players from West Coast in the win, then promising performances, and then lastly, my key takeaways as usual. But before we get into that, I do need to make what will hopefully be one of my last humble requests for those watching these videos who are not already subscribed to please consider subscribing to the channel. As I've mentioned in previous videos, YouTube's monetization policy requires a minimum of 1,000 subscribers before any videos after that point can generate revenue. And once that milestone's reached, it'll just be a lot easier to justify scrounging up the spare time, like after getting the kids to sleep, to make these videos. And we're getting so close now. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It will cost you absolutely nothing. And if you enjoy the content, it just means that you won't miss any of the weekly reviews of the AFL and the Waffle side, who had a bye this weekend, in case anyone's wondering why there isn't one from this weekend. Anyways, now that we've covered that, let's start off with a few stray thoughts that I figured would be great to start the video, and they didn't really fit anywhere else. So my first one was things I will never get tired of seeing, such as Elijah Hewitt flushing set shots from outside 50 as if it's easy. It's not, but I'm pretty sure his strike rate from there is 100%, I think on at least 3 occasions, or probably just 3 occasions, but that's pretty good. My second is Adam Simpson is probably the best thing to happen to AFL media. I don't think there's anybody with better insights for special comments during a broadcast. And thirdly, how good does Tim Kelly look when he's not on the opposition's radar? I think it was a real stroke of genius by McWalter, pulling him out of the midfield for a while and then throwing him back in there at a crucial moment when the opposition just weren't prepared for it. And on that note, let's get into the best players from today. At the top of my list today was Harley Reid. In his first 3 quarters, he was the best player on the ground in my eyes. And he was the main force that put us in the driver's seat, I think, before we ran out, what was really a nervous fourth quarter for the win, even though I think right at the end we came good. There were some patches there that got very concerning. And it's a bit strange for me to credit 15 disposals, even with 2 goals, for the best player on the ground, or my best player. But he made every one of those disposals incredibly damaging, and was playing like that number 1 draft pick that we refused to trade in the 2023 national draft. We saw it all, including the fend-offs, shrug tackles, penetrating kicks and handballs from inside the contest, and then running goals from outside 50. It does look to me like there's clubs that he likes playing against, and St Kilda's one of them, but it's even more my hope that a game like tonight's will be more of a fuse that's been lit, and it's just the beginning of a real turning point for him, because he has been building a bit of form anyway in the last few weeks. The next best out there for me was Brady Hough. It looked like he might have stepped away from his niche a little bit a month ago when he stepped into the midfield, but tonight was a real breakout game for Hough in a really important role for us. And he even managed to kick his first goal in AFL while he was at it. I think he finished with a team high of 23 disposals, which separately is still a little bit of a worry for me, and our lack of guaranteed accumulators. But it is a part of the new game style. And Hough also high scored our collective fantasy points as well. He had 5 tackles, 20 pressure acts, and that maiden goal. So he looked really slick with the ball in hand. He kind of looks like a big-bodied Liam Baker at the moment, which in itself hints at a really high ceiling. Third up for me was Liam Ryan. He was also up there tonight. I think like a lot of our elite senior players, it just felt like St Kilda let him off the leash a little bit, or just didn't have the talent to stop that mixture of aerial work and line breaking clearances. As always, his disposal around the ground and inside 50 is about as good as anybody in the competition. And on top of that, he finished with 2 goals, 1. Number 4, Matt Flynn had his best game as an Eagle. He had 30 hit-outs, which was less than Rowan Marshall at a glance, but not when you count ruck contests, which Williams and Flynn won collectively, which means that if you isolate the taps that Flynn had against Marshall, I do think that he definitely took the ruck honours. And he also finished with 17 disposals and a goal. I do want to personally point out that while he may not be an elite ruck of the competition, I've always had confidence in Flynn's best being good enough after seeing what he was capable of in the 2024 preseason before his major hamstring injury. And I think that with the support of Bailey Williams at the moment, we are just beginning to see him start to find that form now. But he gets better, is my bet. There's probably a handful of other guys who belong in the list of best players tonight, hence my Oscars acceptance speech comment earlier. So I'll just have to reel off some of the names like Tyler Brockman, Len Baker, Jack Graham, Ryan Marich. I think I could possibly get away with describing all of those guys as known quantities, although I probably do need to mention that Brockman's work as a centre bounce specialist probably deserves a separate mention outside of that known quantity contribution. But that's more or less all the best players, and brings me on to the promising performances. This is going to be a bit of a weird version of this segment for me, at least, because I usually do focus on the younger guys. But 2 of the guys I'm putting in this category are actually the club captains, Liam Duggan and Oscar Allen. Both our captains this year, I think, found themselves probably in the both of them, worst part of their careers for form, which has been really unfortunate for the club at a low point where we desperately needed that senior leadership. But Allen swung forward against a bit of an undersized St Kilda backline and really had his way with them as a result of that. He kicked 2 goals too, which I always feel is a bit of a shame for guys who are finding their form to leave that opportunity to kick a bag out there on the field. I know Matt always had something similar. One of his better games of the seasons recently, there were a few points in there that could have really made it a bag, especially when one set shot miss from Allen tonight was from in real close. But ignoring those minor negatives, there's no denying that he was back to his best again tonight. He ended the game with 13 disposals and the 2 goals, and looked really unforgiving in the marking contest against anyone who's less than those elite defenders of the competition. Duggan finished with 21 disposals, including a little stroke of genius in the tackle, backheeling the ball to a teammate instead of getting done holding the ball. I think they replayed that a few times, so hopefully everyone knows exactly the footage that I'm talking about. But he also did a lot of intercepting and line breaking, finishing with, I think, just a smidge under 600 metres gained for the night. So, my comment on that is that our leaders are back. My other promising players from tonight were Sandy Brock and Harry Edwards. I gave these guys a little bit of airtime during the pre-season for the potential that I saw in them to really fill that gaping hole of Barras leaving and even Gov getting to the twilight of his career. And it's just starting to be proven right now that we're a little bit deeper into the season, probably a little bit later than I expected. When you see these things, you kind of assume that, round 1, these guys are going to walk out and prove you right. But I guess when I reflect on it, it's probably expected. Edwards played really well last week as well, and he's really beginning to get a bit of a reputation for that golden fist spoil that he does in big packs. He's also starting to show that he likes to take the game on and charge at the right moments with the ball in his hands, but in that real good defender way where they don't try and do it all the time, but only when it's appropriate, which is really a skill in itself when you're a defender and you can't afford to be flashy because mistakes mean goals. And it's also quite satisfying seeing him throw his weight around a little bit too. We haven't had that angry big man presence since Scott Lysett, I think, defected to Port Adelaide. I think he was probably the last guy we had like that. Sandy Brock just screams composure and reliability to me. He's got the attributes to play the key defender role, which he's doing, but his decision-making with the ball in hand is elite, and especially coming from the deepest part of the ground, which is becoming really difficult in the modern game. Brock's got excellent vision, decision-making, and he doesn't really rush, but he also doesn't hold the ball up either when he can move it on. So that's really it for my best and promising players, which just leaves my key takeaways from the win today. My first key takeaway is that West Coast may not be fixed, but we have a temporary working formula while we wait for all of our young talent to come up to speed in a working environment, functional environment, I should probably say. The formula I'm talking about is all the changes to our centre bounce attendance that I think has brought competitiveness to a side that doesn't really have genuinely elite full-time midfielders in the same bulk or the same number that other clubs, almost all other clubs have, as well as the top tier ruckman. So, that decision to move Liam Ryan and Tyler Brockman into those bounces has made us dangerous again at centre clearances, while the move to have Bailey Williams as a genuine key forward and supporting ruckman, it's just made the Flynn Williams combo a threat to competition rucks again, as opposed to, I think, those guys just being able to hold their own most weeks against somebody who's got a bigger reputation. Also seeing Brady Hoff prove himself in the midfield role tonight is also a huge win for the squad. And ultimately, I think all of this gives our future mids like, Hewitt, Reid, Gross, Hall, Bo Allen, and the rest, all the time they need to build themselves into the role at a good pace. I'm not going to lie, I do still very much want to see someone like Tom Gross or even Elijah Hewitt just get full-time minutes at that centre, as well as Clay Hall, but it does give them a lot of breathing space from being thrown in the deep end, which was really where I think we were at the start of this season. The second key takeaway is that we really did get stitched up with the start of our fixture this year. As a rebuilding side, we got thrown some really unwinnable games early, which I think heaped a ton of pressure on the moment that we came up against beatable opposition. Somewhere around round 5, I think the pressure was already up because we'd lost our first 4 games. And you can just feel tonight that pressure valve's just been opened by getting that first win. And I know we're deep into the season, but you can just feel it basically coming off that, I think it was a GWS game or Brisbane possibly, where you just knew that they weren't really winnable. And then suddenly we're 5 games in before we considered any of our games winnable. The positive to that, though, is that the second half of the season should actually be consistently easier and a lot more enjoyable with that 4 points monkey off our backs. I actually had a mate message me that we'd gotten clear of Fitzroy, who went winless, I think 1 year in the 60s, he said. So I think that just goes to show just how low the confidence was and how confidence shaking the start of the season was for probably fans, but also for the side as well, for the players. And I do think by the time the season's done, there will be a few good wins in it and maybe a couple of really bad losses. But yeah, that sort of concept that we were going to go winless was probably an unfair one that was planted by, that early pressure. Anyway, that's a long key takeaway. My third and final one, though, is that despite our performance on paper, West Coast has actually been really consistent and competitive all season. Even in our biggest losses, it felt like we never really let teams run away from us. And those big losses, I think, were a genuine reflection of how big the gap was between us and the elite lists of the competition, rather than just our own ability to compete. And I know that might sound like a bad thing, but just mull that over because it's really not, at least in my opinion. But anyways, that's a wrap on tonight's victory review. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you all again next weekend for our hit out against the Crows as well, as the return of the Waffle side from the bye. Anyway, cheers until then.